Her boss mocked her for being deaf. But a billionaire's actions shocked everyone. She stood frozen under the harsh light, her voice trembling. Then came his words, cold, sharp, unforgettable. Maybe we should get her a hearing aid for deadlines too. The whole room burst into laughter. Phones recording, smiles twisting into knives. Emily Hayes didn't cry. She just stood there, hearing the sound of her world collapsing, the laughter of people who called cruelty a joke. No. Outside, rain bled down the glass walls of Manhattan, city lights shimmering like tears she refused to shed. A single woman, humiliated, drowning in noise she could no longer bear to hear. What would you have done in her place, if silence was your only way to survive? Welcome to Emotional Echoes, a channel where emotions come alive and every story leaves a lasting echo in your heart. Please subscribe to Emotional Echoes channel. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so more souls can feel these stories. Stay with my video till the very end and let me know where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story spreads. Now, let me tell you about the woman the world tried to silence. And the moment she found her voice again, Emily Hayes stood in front of the meeting table, holding her notes so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had practiced this pitch all night. Every word, every gesture, rehearsed again and again. At 32, she had learned how to hide her ADHD, how to smile through dizziness, how to pretend the ringing in her ears was nothing. All she wanted was to look capable, just once. She started talking, her voice steady at first. For a moment, she almost felt normal. Then the sound began to fade. The click of pens, the hum of computers, the air conditioner, everything slipped away until there was nothing. Complete silence. Her lips moved, but she couldn't hear herself anymore. Panic hit her chest like a fist. She looked around. People were still moving, talking, laughing, but no sound reached her. She tried again, her voice breaking. "Wait, I can't hear you. What's happening?" No one reacted at first. Then she saw Mr. Cole lean back in his chair, smirking. He mouthed something, and the team burst out laughing. A second later, sound came crashing back. Mr. Cole's voice sliced through the room. "Relax, Emily. We were just testing your reaction. Guess you failed." The laughter grew louder, filling every corner. Emily froze. Her throat burned. The room spun. The sound of their laughter was sharp, almost metallic. It cut through her like glass. She bent down to pick up her papers. Her hands shook so badly she dropped the microphone. The thud echoed. She wanted to vanish. No one offered to help. Mr. Cole turned back to his laptop like nothing happened. To them, it was just another office joke. To her, it was a crack running down the middle of everything she had tried to hold together. She walked out of the room without looking back. The laughter followed her into the hallway, fading only when the elevator doors closed. Inside, she finally breathed. Her chest rose and fell fast, almost trembling. She looked at her reflection in the steel wall, pale skin, tired eyes, a woman who tried too hard to fit in. Her ears were still ringing. The world around her was loud again, but inside, everything was quiet. She pressed her hand to her chest, whispering to herself so softly no one could hear. They called it a joke, but it felt like a knife. When Emily was 6, her teacher asked her parents to come in after school. The room smelled like chalk and lemon cleaner. Her small backpack hung by the door while she sat outside, swinging her feet, tracing shapes on the floor with her shoe. Through the half-open door, she could hear her name being spoken too many times, the tone flat and tired. The teacher said she couldn't sit still, couldn't follow instructions, couldn't finish a single task. They said she needed help, but what Emily heard was something worse. She was different. Her mother sat quietly, hands folded on her lap. Her father stood by the window, staring at the rain outside. When the teacher finally said she might never make it to college, her father let out a long sigh. Her mother's eyes filled with tears, but she forced a small smile. That night, no one said much on the ride home. The windshield wipers scraped against the glass, steady and slow, like a tired heartbeat. At home, Emily went to her room. Her crayons were scattered across the small wooden desk. She started drawing without thinking, a small bird with one wing bent downward. It couldn't fly, so she drew a nest instead. Her hand trembled as she pressed the pencil too hard, breaking the tip. She didn't cry. She was used to things breaking around her. Her mother walked in quietly, sat beside her, and touched her shoulder. "One day, baby, your wings will heal." Emily didn't look up. She just stared at the bird. Her father's voice came from the hallway, calm but cold. "Maybe she just needs to try harder." The words were simple, but they landed heavy. Emily learned then that love could sound like disappointment too. The next morning at school, she tried to be good. She sat still. She kept her eyes on the blackboard, following the chalk lines like they were the rules of the world. But her mind kept drifting to the sound of the rain, to the bird with the broken wing, to the way her father didn't look at her when she smiled. When the teacher called on her, she froze. The class laughed. Her ears burned, her throat tightened. She whispered sorry, even though she didn't know what for. She learned that sorry was the safest word. It made people stop looking at her like she was strange. It made the world quiet for a second. So she kept saying it, year after year, until it became a habit. Looking back now, she realizes that every sorry she said took a small piece of her voice away. Since I was little, I wasn't taught to dream. I was taught to apologize for existing. Emily thought college would be her fresh start. No one there knew about her diagnosis. No one knew she had spent her childhood apologizing for existing. She studied harder than anyone, slept less, lived on caffeine and determination. While others laughed in dorm rooms and planned road trips, she hid behind her headphones, hoping music could hold her world together. But the noise inside her head never stopped. It was a constant hum that rose and fell like the tide, sometimes faint, sometimes deafening. One afternoon, as she read in the library, the words on the page began to blur. The whispering around her turned hollow, like she was trapped underwater. Her pulse raced, the room tilted. The world spun once, twice, then vanished into black. When she opened her eyes, she was lying in a hospital bed. The lights were too white. A doctor spoke beside her, his lips moving slowly. She caught fragments, inner ear. "Meniere's may lose hearing permanently." The words didn't land right. They felt far away, muffled, like echoes through glass. She nodded even though she barely understood. Her chest felt heavy, her throat tight. She stared out the window, where rain hit the glass in soft, rhythmic taps. Each drop had a sound. Tap, tap, tap. She focused on it like she could memorize it, like she could hold on to that one last piece of the world before it disappeared. The doctor said something else, but she wasn't listening. All she could think about was the rain, and how, one day soon, she might never hear it again. Later that night, she left the hospital alone. The sky had opened up. Rain poured over her shoulders, cold and endless. The streets glistened under the yellow streetlights. Cars splashed through puddles, but she couldn't hear the rush of water anymore. Only a dull, distant ringing filled her head. She lifted her face toward the storm, mouth open in a silent scream. Her voice was gone, swallowed by the downpour. As she stood there, a memory flashed, her mother humming softly by the window when she was little, brushing Emily's hair while the rain tapped on the roof. That melody, simple and warm, was the last sound she remembered clearly. The last sound before everything began to fade. She reached into her bag and pulled out her old headphones. The wire was tangled, one side broken. They had been her armor for years, her way of pretending she belonged. She stared at them for a long time, then dropped them into a puddle at her feet. The rain hit the plastic, washing away fingerprints and dust. Slowly, they sank, vanishing beneath the ripples. The light from the street lamps shimmered across the water, stretching and blurring until it no longer looked real. Emily stood still, soaked to the skin, her breath uneven. The world around her kept moving, uncaring cars passing, people rushing home, life going on. But in her silence, time stopped. She pressed her palms to her ears, desperate to hear something, anything. There was nothing. just the echo of her own heartbeat, soft and far away. That was the moment she knew. The world hadn't gone quiet. She had. The office was alive with chatter, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, laughter bouncing off the glass walls. Emily sat at her desk near the corner, trying to disappear behind the glow of her computer screen. Her ears were ringing again, a faint hum that made it hard to focus. She blinked hard, forcing herself to finish the report before the meeting. She could not afford another mistake, not here. When the meeting started, she walked in quietly, clutching her notebook. The room smelled of coffee and sharp perfume. Mr. Cole stood at the head of the table, sleek, confident, smiling like someone who never doubted himself. Emily sat near the end, keeping her head down. The team discussed numbers and deadlines. When Mr. Cole asked for updates, his eyes landed on her. Emily's chest tightened. She opened her folder, ready to explain the new marketing layout, but her voice came out softer than she intended. The hum in her ears made her words blur together. Someone across the table smirked. Mr. Cole leaned forward, pretending not to hear. "Sorry, what was that, Emily? Speak up. You should know we value clear communication here." His tone dripped with sarcasm, and a few people chuckled. She tried again, but the ringing grew louder, swallowing her own voice. He cut her off before she could finish. Maybe we should get her a hearing aid for deadlines too. The room froze for half a second, then burst into laughter. Loud, cruel, the kind of laughter that doesn't stop even when it should. Emily felt her stomach twist. The blood drained from her face. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, waiting to see what she would do. She forced a small smile, the kind that hurt more than crying. Mr. Cole clapped his hands once, moving on as if nothing had happened. "All right, next point. Let's stay focused." The laughter faded, but the echo stayed, crawling under her skin. When the meeting ended, she left fast, eyes fixed on the floor. The hallway stretched endlessly. The sound of typing and chatter blurred into static. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears, heavy and uneven. She pushed open the restroom door and locked it behind her. The faucet screeched as she turned it on full. Water rushed into the sink, spilling over her hands. She leaned forward, breathing hard. The mirror stared back, pale face, red eyes, shoulders trembling. She whispered to her reflection, voice barely there. "You are fading, Emily, and no one even notices." The sound of water was loud enough to drown her thoughts, but not her pain. Her fingers dug into the edge of the sink, knuckles white. She closed her eyes and wished the noise would stop. For a moment, it felt like the whole world was spinning again, like that night in the rain. When she finally turned off the faucet, the silence felt heavier than before. She looked one last time at her reflection. The woman staring back wasn't broken yet, but she was close. Outside, the office laughter started up again. It carried through the thin walls, light and careless, as if nothing had happened. Emily stood still, her hand still damp, her pulse still racing. It's not the silence that hurts, it's realizing no one misses your voice. That night, the apartment was dark, except for the pale light of her laptop screen. Emily sat still, staring at the email that ended everything. It was short, cold, and final. Her position had been terminated due to restructuring. There were no kind words, no thanks for her effort, just a line wishing her luck in the future. She read it again and again, until the words stopped meaning anything. Her hands were shaking, but her face stayed calm, the way it always did when she broke quietly. Around her were unopened envelopes stacked on the table. Bills, medical notices, and rent warnings formed small, silent towers. She picked one up, unfolded it slowly, and stared at the number printed inside. It didn't even look real. The weight of it pressed down on her chest until breathing hurt. The refrigerator hummed faintly, the clock ticked without rhythm. Every sound in the room felt distant, like coming from another world. Emily leaned back in the chair, her body heavy with exhaustion. The ringing in her ears had returned, a soft, endless tone that filled the silence like a ghost. She rubbed her temples, wishing she could turn off her mind. The glow of the computer screen flickered, turning her reflection in the glass into something ghostly, a version of herself fading right in front of her eyes. She stood up and walked toward the balcony. The city stretched below her, glowing in the night. Skyscrapers shimmered, streets pulsed with headlights, and laughter floated from faraway windows. She looked down at it, all the life she couldn't reach, the noise she could no longer feel part of. She pressed her palms to the cold railing, eyes fixed on the world that seemed to move on without her. Across the street, in the glass of a neighboring building, she saw her own reflection, small, blurred, almost invisible. For years, she had fought to be seen, to be heard. Tonight, she felt like a ghost staring back at herself. The loneliness sat deep in her chest, not loud, but steady, like a second heartbeat. Down below, traffic moved slowly through the rain-polished streets. One car caught her attention, a long black limousine, its lights cutting through the darkness. The windows gleamed like mirrors, reflecting the glow of the city. As it passed, its headlights swept across the side of her building, casting a sudden beam of light through the balcony glass. For a moment, the light landed directly on her face. It was warm, golden, almost alive. She blinked, frozen, her breath catching in her throat. It felt like someone or something had noticed her, like the light had reached out just for that second to remind her she still existed. Inside the car, Ethan Whitmore sat reading through a folder under the soft cabin light. The world outside was just another blur of motion, faces he would never see. Yet as the limousine passed her building, he glanced up briefly, sensing movement through the tinted glass, a shadow by a balcony, a faint outline against the city lights. He didn't know why, but for an instant, he paused, his eyes lingering on that faint glow before looking away. Back on the balcony, Emily didn't move. The light faded, the limousine disappeared around the corner, and the street returned to its usual rhythm. She stayed there, her face still warm from that fleeting touch of light, her heart unsure if it had imagined the moment. The city hummed again, distant and indifferent. She whispered softly into the air, words barely escaping her lips. "I used to fear silence. Now it's all I have left." She stood there a while longer, watching the rain begin again, the drops tracing quiet lines down the railing. Somewhere below, in the blur of lights and sound, the world kept turning. But in that brief, silent instant, two lives had crossed paths, one falling, one waiting, and neither of them knew it yet. The next morning, Emily woke up before sunrise. Her head still rang faintly, but she pushed through the dizziness. She had seen a posting online the night before, a communications assistant at the Whitmore Foundation. It felt far beyond her reach, but something inside her whispered to try. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the tiny piece of her that still believed life could change. She took the subway downtown, holding her resume so tight the paper bent at the edges. The building was tall and glassy, too bright for how small she felt. The lobby smelled like fresh coffee and lemon polish, the kind of clean that made her self-conscious about her worn jacket and scuffed shoes. She checked in, smiled politely, and sat waiting. Every tick of the clock made her heartbeat louder in her chest. When her name was called, she stood up too fast and felt the familiar rush of dizziness. The world tilted for a second before settling again. The assistant led her to a quiet office filled with soft light and framed photos of charity work. Behind the desk sat Ethan Whitmore. He looked up from a stack of files, his expression calm but distant. Ethan was the kind of man who had lived through too much loss to show it. The grey at his temples made him look older than 42. His wedding ring was gone, but the pale band of skin remained. When he greeted her, his voice was low, almost gentle. He asked about her background, her experience in marketing, her goals. Emily tried to answer, but her voice caught halfway through. Her throat was dry, and the ringing in her ears returned. She shifted in her seat, trying to hide her discomfort. Then, as she adjusted her hair, her hearing aid slipped from behind her ear and fell onto the carpet. Panic flashed across her face. She reached for it quickly, embarrassed, but before she could, Ethan stood and picked it up. He held it carefully, like something fragile that mattered. "You don't have to hide that," he said softly. "Most people don't say that kindly," she replied, her voice trembling. He looked at her for a moment that felt longer than it should have. "I'm not most people." For the first time in a long while, Emily didn't feel the need to explain herself. She didn't feel broken or less than. She just felt seen. They talked more, not about numbers or strategies, but about purpose. He asked her what she wanted from work, and she told him she wanted to build something that meant something. He nodded like he understood exactly what that felt like. When the interview ended, she stood to leave, expecting the usual polite goodbye. Instead, he said her name slowly, like he was still deciding something. "Let's call this a trial. 2 months. Show me what you can do." Her heart skipped. For a second, she forgot about the noise in her head, the bills, the email that had ended her last job. She smiled, small but real. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, already looking back at the papers on his desk. But there was a faint trace of a smile on his face too. As she stepped outside, the air felt different, lighter. The sun hit the glass of the building, and for a moment she caught her reflection, tired, uncertain, but alive. She walked down the steps, holding her resume tight, not because she was afraid anymore, but because something inside her had shifted. Maybe hope didn't need to be loud. Maybe it just needed to be heard once. The first few weeks at the foundation were quiet, but in a different way than the silence Emily used to fear. The office felt alive with purpose. The walls were covered in posters from past campaigns, and the people who worked there didn't rush or shout. They spoke softly, listened carefully, and seemed to see her for what she could do, not what she lacked. For the first time in years, Emily didn't feel like she had to hide. Her project was called The Voice Within. It aimed to share stories from people living with disabilities across the country. At first, the title felt ironic to her. She had lost so much of her own hearing that the idea of finding her voice seemed impossible. But as she began interviewing people, something inside her shifted. She spoke to a blind pianist who said he could see music in color. She met a young man with autism who described the world as too loud but full of detail others missed. Each story carried a kind of beauty she had forgotten existed. Ethan watched her work from his office window. She moved differently now. Her posture was straighter, her steps lighter. There were moments when she laughed with the team, the sound soft but real. It was the first time he had heard that kind of laughter in the building since his wife passed away. He found himself staying later just to listen. It reminded him that healing didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply appeared, quiet and steady, in the middle of ordinary days. One afternoon, Emily presented her first round of interviews to the team. The room was full, but she didn't flinch under the attention. As the videos played, the faces on the screen spoke of struggle, but also pride. When the presentation ended, the room was silent, not out of pity but respect. Ethan looked around and saw something rare. Everyone seemed moved. Emily stood there, a small smile on her lips, her eyes bright with relief. After everyone left, Ethan walked over and told her it was the most honest work the foundation had done in years. She thanked him quietly, her hands clasped together. He asked if she ever missed her old job, the one she left behind before joining. She shook her head. "That world was full of noise," she said, "but no one ever listened. Here, people actually hear each other." That night, they stayed late, finalizing campaign details. The office lights dimmed, and outside, the city pulsed softly through the glass windows. Ethan stood by the desk, watching her type. He asked her how she stayed so calm when things got difficult. She paused, thinking. Then she said she had learned to listen differently. He looked at her, curious. She said she used to think hearing was about sound, but it was more than that. People say a lot without words. You can hear someone's loneliness in the way they look away, or their kindness in the way they pause before speaking. You just have to listen with what's left when everything else is gone. Ethan didn't respond right away. He just nodded slowly, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. The conversation lingered in the air long after the words faded. In that moment, they both understood something neither could explain. He had spent years running from his pain by working harder. She had spent years hiding hers behind silence. But here, in this quiet office, surrounded by stories of people who refused to give up, they both found a reason to start again. When she packed her bag that night, Ethan waited by the door. He told her she had done good work. She smiled, saying she finally understood what the campaign name really meant. The voice within was not about speaking louder. It was about listening to the parts of yourself that never stopped trying to be heard. She left the building under the soft streetlights, her reflection gliding across the glass doors, carrying with her something lighter than before. The hall was bright and full of life. Cameras flashed, music played, and people filled every seat, waiting for the campaign reveal. Emily stood at the center of the stage, her heart racing, but this time not from fear. The screen behind her glowed with the title, The Voice Within. It was the first project she had ever led, and for the first time, she believed she deserved to be there. She began speaking, her voice calm, steady, clear. She talked about what it meant to listen to those the world ignored. She spoke about courage, about empathy, about turning pain into purpose. Ethan stood at the back of the room, watching. There was pride in his eyes. He saw a woman who had rebuilt herself from silence. But then, mid-sentence, Emily froze. The words on her tongue stopped. The lights blurred. The edges of the room started to spin. The sound of applause faded, like someone was slowly turning down a volume knob. Her breath hitched. Her fingers trembled as the microphone slipped from her hand. For a moment she thought it was just her nerves, but then everything went quiet again. Not the quiet of peace, but the kind that swallows everything. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Panic surged through her chest. The faces in the audience blurred into shapes. Ethan moved before anyone else did. He rushed forward, calling her name, but she couldn't hear him. She saw his mouth move, his eyes wide, his hand reaching out, just as her knees gave way. The room erupted in chaos. People shouted, someone yelled for a doctor, lights flickered. Ethan knelt beside her, his arm around her shoulders, trying to wake her. Emily's eyes fluttered open for a second. She saw his face, his lips forming her name again and again. She wanted to answer, but her body refused. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the campaign banner above her, the voice within glowing in the light. When she woke, the world was white. Hospital walls, machines humming softly. Ethan sat beside her, his suit jacket gone, sleeves rolled up, eyes red from hours without rest. She could see him speak, but couldn't hear anything. The silence was complete now. She felt the tears come before she could stop them. He reached for her hand, his voice quiet but firm. The doctor's words were clear enough to read on his lips. It might be permanent this time. She turned away, the weight of those words pressing down harder than anything before. Ethan squeezed her hand tighter. "If your world goes silent," he said slowly, "I'll learn to speak your silence." His lips trembled on the last word, but his eyes didn't waver. She looked at him, searching his face, trying to hold on to the sound of his voice she could no longer hear. For the first time, she didn't feel broken, just human and loved. A month later, the sky above Washington was clear and bright. Inside the convention center, hundreds of people gathered for the National Disability Employment Month event. Banners lined the walls, cameras stood ready, and rows of chairs filled with journalists, leaders, and advocates. On the program, one name was circled in bold: Emily Hayes. Backstage, Emily stood still, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the small voice-to-text device on her wrist. The world around her was a blur of movement, yet all she could hear was silence. A deep, familiar silence that no longer frightened her. She looked at her reflection in the mirror one last time. The woman staring back was not the one who once hid behind fear. She was different now, stronger. When her name appeared on the screen, she stepped out into the light. The audience rose in applause, the sound of which she could only feel through the vibration in the floor. She smiled faintly, taking her place at the podium. The large screen behind her lit up as her voice app connected. Her words began to appear in real time, glowing white against the black background. She typed her first line slowly, breathing with purpose. For years, I thought silence meant weakness. The words appeared one by one, and the audience grew still. She continued, "But now I know silence can mean strength, because when you lose one voice, you find 1,000 others." Her eyes swept across the room. She saw faces shining under the stage lights, saw people wiping away tears, not out of pity, but out of recognition. She told them about the people she had met through The Voice Within, about the blind pianist who painted music, about the young man with autism who taught her that difference is not failure, about the kindness that begins when someone finally listens. Her fingers moved faster now. "I used to think being different meant being alone, but I was wrong. Being different means being human." Her throat tightened, but she kept typing. "I stand here today, not because I found my old voice, but because I learned to hear the world in new ways. In every silence, there is a story. In every quiet heart, there is a voice waiting to be heard." Ethan sat in the front row, his eyes fixed on her. He didn't try to hide the pride on his face. To him, she was more than a survivor. She was proof that strength could come from brokenness, that healing could grow from silence. When she paused for breath, he was the first to stand. The rest of the room followed. The applause was thunderous, but she only felt it through the vibration in her chest. Emily smiled through her tears. She looked out at the crowd, then toward Ethan. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the noise, the light, and the world around them disappeared. She finished her speech with one final message. The screen behind her lit up with her last words. "The world is full of voices. You don't need to be the loudest one. You just need to be true." The audience stood in silence now, honoring not her loss, but her courage. In that stillness, Emily felt something she hadn't in years: peace. She placed a hand over her heart and closed her eyes. She could no longer hear their applause, but she could feel every beat of it. The sun hung low over Central Park, turning the lake gold. The air was cool, touched by the scent of grass and the slow rustle of autumn leaves. Emily walked beside Ethan, their steps quiet, their shadows long on the path. The city hummed in the distance, but for her there was only stillness, a stillness she had finally made peace with. Ethan carried 2 cups of coffee, one for her, though he knew she liked to hold it more than drink it. They stopped by the water's edge, where the trees opened wide, revealing a sky that seemed endless. He said something, his lips moving gently, but she couldn't read them this time. The fading light made it harder. She smiled faintly and took out her phone. She typed slowly, her fingers steady. "I can't hear your voice anymore." She turned the screen toward him. He read it, then looked at her, eyes soft, filled with something more powerful than pity or sorrow. He set the cup down, reached for her hand, and guided it to his chest. His heart beat slow and steady beneath her palm. He spoke again, his voice low, calm. But this time she didn't try to read his lips. She just felt the rhythm of his words through his heartbeat. He told her he would make sure she could always hear him there. She watched his face, the way the corners of his mouth lifted when he said it, and something inside her shifted, quiet but certain. The wind moved through the trees, carrying fallen leaves across the water. Ducks floated near the shore, rippling the golden reflection of the sky. Ethan stayed beside her, not saying more, not needing to. She leaned her head against his shoulder, closing her eyes. For the first time, the silence between them felt whole. She thought about how far she had come. The girl who once feared being different now stood in the middle of the world, hearing it in ways no one else could. Every vibration under her feet, every smile, every shared glance, it all had sound now, just not the kind anyone could record. It was the kind you felt when life stopped shouting and started whispering. The last light of day slipped behind the skyline, painting everything in soft orange. Emily lifted her phone once more, typing a final message. "Thank you for listening, even when I had no voice left." He read it, then reached over, closing her fingers gently around the phone. His eyes said what words could not. As they stood there, the world felt perfectly still. No noise, no fear, no weight. Just the rhythm of two hearts beating in quiet harmony. She looked out over the lake, the ripples fading into calm. She had lost her hearing, but found something louder: love, purpose, and peace. From a woman mocked for her silence to one who taught the world to listen, Emily's journey reminds us that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. In a world obsessed with noise and power, she found meaning in empathy and love in the quiet heart of another soul. Her story isn't just about hearing, but about truly listening to pain, to kindness, to life itself. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. Tell me how it made you feel. And if you believe the world needs more compassion, please like, share, and subscribe to Emotional Echoes, where every story heals a little piece of the human heart. Thanks for listening.